There is a terrifying concept in historical macroeconomics that suggests empires don't die from bad luck. They don't die because of a single war or a plague or one bad king. They die because they follow a script, a precise, almost mathematical 7-stage pattern of collapse. And, well, this isn't theoretical. It's the exact script that destroyed Spain in the 1590s, the British Empire in the 1900s, and of course the Soviet Union in 1991.
And we aren't just looking at dusty history books today. The reason this matters, the reason we're having this debate, is because the ledger suggests the United States hasn't just entered this pattern. The argument is that the U.S. has already completed 5 of the 7 lethal stages.
That really is the central question. Is the United States mathematically locked in to a sequence of inevitable collapse, looking down the barrel of a Soviet-style implosion, or is comparing the modern American economy to, say, 16th century Spain a fundamental misreading of how complex systems work? I am going to argue that the pattern is robust. I'm arguing that the math regarding debt, currency, and imperial overreach is, well, it's inescapable, and we are sprinting toward a sudden catastrophe.
And I'm taking the other side. Look, I acknowledge the fragility. The data is ugly, there's no getting around that. But I question the fatalism of this sequence. I believe the mechanics of collapse differ wildly between a gold standard empire like Spain and a modern fiat superpower like the US. We might be declining, yes, but I don't think we're walking off a cliff. The decline might just be a slope, not a sheer drop.
All right, let's get into the machinery of this. I want to start by laying out my position. And I want to be very specific about this rule of 3 that the history books just scream at us. You have 3 distinct superpowers. Spain, the richest empire on Earth, controlling half the world's silver. Then Britain, the largest empire in history, right? The sun never sets. And the USSR, a nuclear titan.
And on the surface, those 3 look absolutely nothing alike. A feudal monarchy, a constitutional monarchy, and a communist dictatorship.
Exactly. Completely opposite political systems, yet they collapsed following the exact same economic sequence. It always moves from invincibility to ruin in 7 steps. Stage 1, military overextension. Stage 2, currency debasement. Stage 3, the debt spiral. Stage 4, loss of productive capacity. And then Stage 5, social decay. Stage 6 is the loss of reserve currency status. And Stage 7, well, that's just collapse.
And your assessment of where we stand today?
We aren't approaching the danger zone. We are living in it. My argument is that the United States has already checked off the first 5 of those boxes. We are currently deep inside Stage 5, social decay, and the financial indicators suggest Stage 6 is knocking on the door. The math says we are next.
Okay, I think that's a powerful narrative, but let me frame my position. I validate the historical data regarding Spain and Britain. The parallels in the debt to GDP ratios, they're striking. But my issue is with the diagnosis of inevitable implosion. You're compressing the timeline. Spain's collapse, it took a brutal century of slow bleeding. Britain's took decades of agonizing readjustment. And the USSR's, well, that took about 900 days.
But the end result was the same. They stopped being superpowers.
The result was a loss of hegemony, yes. But Spain is still there. People go on vacation there. Britain is still a G7 economy. They didn't cease to exist physically, except for the Soviet Union, which was, a unique artificial political construct. My core argument is that the U.S. has structural tools, specifically regarding fiat currency and tech dominance, that Philip II of Spain just didn't have. The Stage 7 outcome might not be a Mad Max apocalypse. It could just be a British-style slow fade into irrelevance. Painful? Absolutely. But fatal? I'm not so sure.
I think irrelevance is a pretty fatal outcome for a country used to running the world. But let's test your theory. I want to start with that first trap, because this is where the dominoes always start falling. Military overextension and economic exhaustion.
The classic guns versus butter debate.
It's more than that. It's imperial hubris that leads directly to bankruptcy. Look at Spain in 1580. They were the masters of the universe, but they were fighting on 4 continents simultaneously: the Ottoman Empire, France, the Netherlands, England. They were spending 50% of their national revenue just to keep the army in the field.
And despite all that spending, they still couldn't suppress the Dutch revolt.
Right, they couldn't win. They were bleeding cash to fight wars that gave them zero return on investment. Britain in 1914 was the same thing, defending territory on 6 continents, stretched so thin that a single spark in Sarajevo burned the whole house down. Now look at the United States today. We have over 750 military bases in 80 countries. We have active troops in 150 nations. Our military budget is $850 billion annually. That is more than the next 10 nations combined, and most of them are allies. The raw numbers are staggering, I agree. And it's not just the money, it's the physics of it. We are physically unable to fulfill our commitments. If we had to respond to a full-scale crisis in Taiwan, a collapse in Ukraine, and a war in the Middle East all at the same time, we couldn't do it. We are stretched thin, exactly like Spain before the fall. We're paying for an empire we can no longer afford to defend.
I see why you draw that line, but let me offer a nuance here. You mentioned the USSR. The Soviet Union spent somewhere between, 15 and 20% of its entire GDP on the military just to keep up with the Americans. That was suicide. That massive allocation of resources starved their civilian economy and, well, it caused a rapid internal collapse.
And you think U.S. spending is negligible?
It's not negligible, but it's different. In nominal terms, yes, we spend more than anyone in history, but as a percentage of GDP, we're hovering around 3.5%, maybe 4%. During the Cold War, it was much higher, sometimes 9 or 10%. The U.S. economy is so massive that it can technically absorb an $850 billion defense budget without starving the population of food. We aren't seeing breadlines because of the F-35 program.
But you're ignoring the debt that's used to fund it. We aren't paying for that 4% out of revenue. We're putting it on the credit card.
Hold on, I'm getting there. My point regarding the military is this. Is the collapse driven by the spending itself or by the inefficiency? The danger I see isn't just the bases, it's the hollow nature of the force. We see recruitment numbers plummeting. Young Americans don't want to serve. We see aging equipment. We see these massive cost overruns where a single bag of bushings for a fighter jet costs $90,000. It's not that we are spending ourselves into oblivion like Spain, it's that we are spending ineffectively for no strategic gain. It's an efficiency crisis, not just a solvency crisis.
I think you're splitting hairs. Whether it's 4% of GDP or 20%, if you have to borrow every single cent of it, you're in trouble. And that brings me to the second point, and honestly, the most mathematical proof of the collapse: the mechanics of currency debasement and the debt spiral.
This is what you call the point of no return?
Precisely. This is where the empire eats itself. When Spain couldn't pay its bills because of those wars we just discussed, they didn't stop fighting. They started debasing the currency. They took silver coins, melted them down, and mixed in copper. Eventually, a so-called silver coin was 95% copper.
So the face value stayed the same, but the purchasing power evaporated. It was theft.
Exactly. It was a fraud against the citizen. Britain did the modern version. They abandoned the gold standard in 1931, and the pound lost 25% of its value overnight. Now look at us. We don't use copper, we use a keyboard. Since 2020, the United States has created out of thin air, over $6 trillion. We increased the M2 money supply by 40% in 2 years.
To keep the economy on life support during the pandemic, yes.
The reason doesn't matter to the math. The dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power since 1971. We aren't mixing copper into silver. We are printing paper to pay off paper. And we are in a classic debt spiral. This is the statistic that keeps me up at night, and I really want listeners to grasp this. We are now borrowing money just to pay the interest on the money we already borrowed. Interest payments on the national debt now exceed our defense spending. We are spending over $1 trillion a year just on interest. That is mathematical terminal velocity.
Okay, I want to push back here because I think this is where the Spain versus U.S. comparison
hits a snag. You have to consider the structural difference. Spain and Britain had external constraints, gold and silver, physical metal. When Spain ran out of silver, the game just stopped. The checks bounced. They crashed immediately.
But we have no constraint, which makes it so much worse.
It makes it more dangerous, sure, but it also buys time. It changes the mechanics. The U.S. operates a purely fiat currency system. We own the printing press. This allows the U.S. to kick the can much, much longer than Spain ever could. Spain had to declare formal bankruptcy 4 times in 40 years. The U.S. can technically never default in its own currency. We can always print the money to pay the bondholders.
But that is the collapse. If you print the money to pay the bondholders, you hyperinflate the currency. You destroy the value of the money to save the system. That isn't a solution. That's stage 7.
It is a form of collapse, I agree, but it creates a soft default rather than a hard crash. Instead of the government saying we can't pay you, they pay you back in dollars that are worth 10% less. It's a slow-motion confiscation of wealth, not a sudden stop. It's the boiling frog metaphor. However, I will concede one major point to you. Once the trust breaks, which brings us to stage 5, the fiat system is actually more fragile than a metal one.
Why do you say that?
Because a debased Spanish coin still had some copper in it. It had physical utility. You could melt it down and make a pot. A dollar bill with no faith behind it, it's worth 0. It's strictly confidence.
And that confidence is eroding because the underlying economy is hollow. Which leads to the third point, which I think is the most overlooked stage in this entire pattern: loss of productive capacity. Economists call it Dutch disease, but I call it the rot from within.
I actually think this is your strongest argument. The financial stuff can be abstract to people. This is visible.
It's visible everywhere. Look at Spain again. They had all the silver in the world flowing in from the Americas. They were drowning in money. So what did they do? They stopped working. The Spanish nobility considered manual labor or commerce to be beneath them. It was a cultural rot. They used their silver to buy French wine, Italian silk, Dutch ships. Their own manufacturing base withered and died.
They became a funnel. The wealth flowed through Spain to the countries that actually made things.
Exactly. Spain was rich, but it wasn't productive. Now look at the U.S. today. We have systematically gutted our manufacturing base. We shipped it to China, Mexico, Vietnam. We run a trade deficit of nearly $1 trillion a year. We design things, we finance things, we market things, but we don't make things. Even our military components, the chips in our missiles, depend on supply chains that run through potential adversaries.
That dependency is critical. If we had a war in the Pacific, we couldn't just ramp up production because the factories aren't here anymore.
We are Spain. We think we are rich because we have the silver, the reserve currency, but we have lost the ability to produce real value. If the trade routes shut down tomorrow, we wouldn't have shoes, antibiotics, or electronics. We would be helpless with a wallet full of useless dollars.
That is a compelling parallel. And have you considered the cultural aspect of this? Because this explains the social decay of stage 5 better than anything else. When productive capacity leaves a nation, the best and brightest change their behavior.
What do you mean?
In Spain, if you were smart, you didn't start a business, you bought a government title or joined the church. In the US, look at where our talent goes. The smartest engineers go to Wall Street to build algorithms for high-frequency trading. They don't build bridges, they build financial derivatives. This is financialization. It's the extraction of value rather than the creation of value.
That's exactly right. And for the working class, when the factories close, you get the checking out. We see fertility rates collapsing. We see 100,000 people dying of drug overdoses every single year. We see a complete loss of shared purpose. You can fix a budget deficit with tax hikes. You can theoretically fix a currency, but you cannot easily rebuild a culturally lost work ethic or a gutted industrial base. That structural rot makes recovery almost impossible.
That's where the stage 5 label feels very real. It's the sense that the system is broken and no one is coming to fix it. We are seeing a society that is consuming itself because it forgot how to produce.
Which is why I argue the sequence is locked in. We can't just policy our way out of a cultural and industrial void. This brings us to the endgame, the final act, Loss of reserve status, stage 6, and collapse, stage 7.
The moment the music stops.
The signs of stage 6 are blinking red. The only reason we haven't collapsed yet is because the world needs dollars to buy oil. But look around. We see the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, actively building a payment system to bypass the dollar. Central banks are buying gold at the highest rate in 50 years. They are dumping treasuries to buy metal. Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan for oil.
De-dollarization. It's happening, though I think slower than some people claim.
It's accelerating. When the world stops needing dollars, all those trillions we printed, they have nowhere to go but back home.
And that causes the hyperinflation scenario.
It causes immediate collapse, and history shows it is sudden. That's the part people don't get. They think they'll have time to prepare. The USSR vanished in 900 days. One day it was a superpower, the next day it was gone. Britain lost its empire effectively in about 20 years after World War II. It is not a graceful decline, it is a cliff.
And that is where I have to dig my heels in. I just don't see the cliff being the only option. Let's look at Britain again. Yes, they lost the empire. Yes, the pound crashed. But Britain became what I call a museum of what used to be great. It didn't cease to exist like the USSR. Spain is a lovely place to visit. It's a pleasant, mid-tier European power.
But for a superpower, becoming a museum is death. It's the death of the American idea. It's the death of the standard of living we think is our birthright.
It's a geopolitical demotion, certainly. But is it a Mad Max scenario? The dissenter in me says that the U.S. has a level of technological entrenchment and geographic security that the USSR did not have. We have two oceans. We are energy independent, something Spain and Britain never were. We have AI, we have Silicon Valley. The collapse might be a transition to a multipolar world where the U.S. is just a regional power, a North American Union, rather than a global empire.
You're optimizing for the best-case scenario, but you are forgetting the debt. Britain didn't have $36 trillion in debt, held by a population that has been promised endless entitlements. Social Security, Medicare, pensions, they are all predicated on the U.S. remaining the global hegemon. When the check bounces for a superpower fueled entirely by debt, the transition to irrelevant regional power isn't just a demotion, it will feel like an apocalypse to the average citizenry.
That is a fair point. The standard of living adjustment required to go from consumption superpower to regional producer would be catastrophic. We're talking about a 30 or 40% drop in the standard of living.
It would be the Great Depression on steroids. And that's why I stick to the comparison with the USSR. The Soviet Union reached stage 5, social decay, economic stagnation, military overextension, and then it just evaporated because the people stopped believing in it. The U.S. is displaying every single symptom of stage 5 right now. We are telling ourselves the same lie every empire tells. We are different. We have the technology. We are America. But the math, debt interest exceeding defense, currency dilution, industrial hollowing out, is undefeated. The pattern implies we are sprinting towards stage 7.
I see the trajectory, and it is clear. The comparison to Spain is particularly haunting regarding the loss of production. That, to me, is the smoking gun. Whether it ends in fire like the USSR or stagnation like Britain, the era of unipolar dominance is mathematically ending. However, I still maintain that the how matters. A slow decline allows for adaptation, a sudden collapse does not. And because we are a fiat empire, we have levers to pull that might prolong the agony or the stability, depending on how you view it, longer than the math suggests.
But delaying the inevitable often makes the final correction more violent. You're just pulling the rubber band back further.
Perhaps, but it gives you time to duck. It's worth noting that both of us agree that the answers aren't in the future, they're in the past. The pattern is a warning that American exceptionalism is not a shield against economic gravity.
Precisely. We leave listeners to decide if the U.S. can defy 500 years of history or if the script is already written. Thank you for joining the debate.
Thank you.